We're about to have a new Prime Minister in the United Kingdom. I think most of us have, a lot of us have lost count as to how many we've had over the last 10 years. There's Andy Burnham, who seems a pretty sure bet at this point. Is he going to be is he the sixth, the seventh, or the eighth since Brexit? We've certainly been churning through them. I think what I think about Andy Burnham though is he just Keir Starmer with a better pair of glasses? Is he really just, he's a nice fellow. He waves and smiles, and he's quite spontaneous, and he's a sort of quite comfortable in his skin, as they say. He's got sort of some personality in a way that Keir Starmer really is just so lacking in any kind of personality, charisma. He's got an absolute deficit in that way. It's much too over-rehearsed and way too over prepared. He just comes across as very dull and cold and so on. Whereas Andy's very warm and personable and the kind of guy you'd like to meet on a night out or at a game of football or whatever. But that's not what makes a great prime minister. People like Attlee, who were also very cold and deficit and had charisma deficits, were fantastically powerful and transformative prime ministers. What concerns me, I think, with Andy Burnham is the fact that he seems to be this idea of good growth. So Keir Starmer was growth, Andy Burnham was good growth. Okay, well, really. So, and he's got these ideas of devolution and returning more power to regions and cities and so on, and that's good. That's good. Britain is way too over centralised. So those are good ideas, and you'll get a little bit of economic kick out of that. I dare say. The problem, I think, is growth conceptually correct, and what I think is that we have lost the idea of redistribution. So if we think about growth, let's just think about growth. What growth would mean? Do we not already, in our current economic structure, growth would imply greater consumption, and do we really need to consume more? And if you think about the vast acreage given over to landfill, or the beach, the tens of scores of miles of beach in Africa, just overwhelmed with textile waste. Do we really need? And then I think do we consume the right things? So a lot of what we consume makes us ill. It makes us fat. It makes us. It leads to disabilities. It leads to billions of pounds that we have to spend every year, winding back the effects of overconsumption and the wrong consumption. So there's a lot of questions around, I think, whether growth in itself is actually a good thing, or whether we're actually in a pretty good place, or we're not in a good place because we consume the wrong things and we overconsume and so on and so forth. But do we need to actually think more? And maybe that's what good growth is about. Maybe good growth is about growing in ways that are actually that are less wasteful, that are healthier. Maybe that's what he means. I'm not 100% sure, but maybe that would be a good thing. Okay. But growth in itself, the idea of growth, the idea of economic growth as a political objective, is originated as a policy distinct from redistribution. So if we go back to, and the idea then is that instead of redistributing the wealth that you have, you grow more wealth, and that kind of trickles down to everybody. The rich might get quite a bit richer, but the poor will also get a bit richer. Everybody kind of benefits from that growth. So you're not alienating particularly the kind of the aspirational middle classes who who want to be rich, and may well have the means to become rich through industry and education and diligence and prudence and sobriety and so on, and they kind of they deserve a reward for that. But prior to growth, there was this idea of redistribution, where wealth was thought of as increasing, as growing, but at the same time where it was understood that capital returns more than labour, and therefore, as capital accumulates, you cream it off and distribute it down to working people and sort of the lower middle classes. And we've lost that concept completely. Nobody dares to say we should actually redistribute the wealth that we already generate. And yet we are an economy that generates vast wealth. We have a trillionaire in our midst for the very first time. We have hundreds of billionaires. We have hundreds of thousands of millionaires. Nobody says that we don't produce enough, that we are the most efficient economic system that has ever plagued the earth. So why does it need to be bigger? Why do we need to grow it? Why don't we redistribute the wealth that we have? I just want to go back then to 1979, because 1979 then is when is obviously when Margaret Thatcher comes into office, and a year later in 1980 Ronald Reagan is elected president in the United States. And it's Reagan and Thatcher who want to move us away from, who want to crush redistribution. They're representing people who either aspire to wealth or have wealth, and so they want to say, well, we're not going to redistribute it. We're going to allow through the state, through fiscal policy. We're not going to redistribute wealth through fiscal policy. What we're going to do is we're going to cut taxes, and that will put more money into the hands of people who generate wealth, who are wealth creators, who are entrepreneurs, and so on. And those people will invest that wealth, and that wealth will turn into jobs, and those jobs will be better paid, and so on, and better quality, and that will raise people up. So that's what then became somewhat derided as trickle down, and that is the system that we currently have. So if we go back to 1979 and back to an economy that was focused on redistribution. Now, in 1979, we take the United Kingdom. There are tariffs, there are currency controls. There's significant unionization of the workforce. There's a lot of control. There's control over the expansion of credit. So there's a lot of government, regulation, a lot of government control, which Thatcher and Reagan, not completely not totally misguidedly, wanted to break away, wanted to get rid of, and let people, the old famous animal instincts get going. But within that controlled and bordered up economy, wealth was primarily expressed through income, through wages, through salaries, through interest rates, through interest on savings, through dividends, and so on. And you had very high rates of marginal taxation. So in the United Kingdom, quite famously, the highest rate of marginal taxation was 98%. So if you earned £20,000, and £20,000 was not a vast amount of money even then. It was equivalent of maybe 130,000 now. So a chief of police or something would earn the kind of money that less than a chief of police would earn in the modern at the present time, or the chief executive, less, quite considerably less than the chief executive of a local authority. So it wasn't that much. So if you earned £20,000, your tax above that was 83%, and then if you had some savings, if you had interest payments or non-earned income, as they used to call it, there was anything above £5,000. There was a super tax on that. So the 83% plus the 15% got you to 98% of your marginal marginal income, and that was quite clearly designed to, and that was paid out through welfare. You know, tax was scaled very steeply. So you paid a lot of tax. You had lots and lots of bands of tax, so that the more you earned, the more tax you paid very, very quickly. On the other hand, benefits were universal. There was no targeting in terms of social housing. If you were next in the queue, you got the house. If you were entitled to an old age pension, you got the pension regardless of how much you earned or whatever you were worth. If you were unemployed, you got the unemployment benefit, and so on and so forth. There were no benefits were universal, but tax was progressive. What has happened since then is that wealth is now expressed not through income but through assets. Incomes have increased most definitely, but they have not increased anything like to the extent that the value of assets has increased. So whereas in 1979 your average home was worth 3 or 4 times your income, the average home now is worth like 9 or 10 times your income. In 1979, there are no personal pension schemes. It's either through your employer or through the state. So you don't have you're not getting wealth through your pension through directly as an individual through your pension savings. So people don't have assets in the way that they have them now. There's no student loans. Education was all free, so you don't have that liability of a student loan. And I've explained in previous essays, previous videos, how assets have become how the value of assets has become massively inflated, and we don't tax them. We don't tax. You're not taxed on your on the value of your assets until or unless you sell them. So crystallize the capital gains as you would say, and when you sell them, you're taxed at 25% as opposed to 40 as opposed to the marginal rate of 40%. So a lot of people keep their wealth in assets where the capital gain is not taxed, and then you can peel it off bit by bit, and you're only paying 25%. And with all sorts of trickery and skullduggery, you can transfer it to the Cayman Islands, you can transfer it to Ireland, you can turn it into interest payments which are pre-tax and so on and so forth. So there's lots of ways for the wealthy to wriggle out of paying anything at all on their wealth. And so when you think about it, we've conceptually lost the idea of redistribution, even though we are fabulously wealthy. But all of that, and we understand that wealth is massively concentrated, but yet we don't even think about redistributing it. Nobody, nobody, it just doesn't hop into anybody's head. And if we did want to redistribute it, we've kind of lost we've lost the technical ability to do it. Nobody really. So I think Ed Miliband wanted to bring in a wealth tax, and the wealth tax was going to be, £1 million. Well, like, oh, £1 million, like really? Any middle class shopkeeper's worth £1 million. I mean, that, it's nothing in this in assets. And then suddenly the Daily Mail comes out with all these widows and orphans who've been left a family house that's worth £1 million and tuppence halfpenny, and they're going to be taxed and they're going to lose their family home and so on and so forth. So I'm not necessarily saying quite that this is how. So I don't know. I'm not a technical tax person, but at the same time you think, well, people who are sitting on literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds worth of relatively liquid assets in many cases. So excluding their family home, excluding their shop or whatever their business might be. The other tax that we've lost, and this is particularly to do with borders, is the ability to tax transfers of intra-corporate transfers. So this is where Meta or Apple or Google set themselves up in Ireland. Ireland is the company that owns the intellectual property, and that intellectual property is rented out to the organisation as it exists in the United Kingdom. And then the organisation in the United Kingdom, which generates all the profit, then sluices off its dividends and its interest payments and its royalty payments or something to the company in Ireland. So instead of paying 25% in the United Kingdom, it pays 12%, if anything, in Ireland. Now, for a lot of companies, that's kind of okay. You think of Starbucks, and Starbucks gets a bit of a kicking on this kind of thing, and maybe fair enough, they probably deserve it. But Starbucks obviously employs a lot of people who pay tax, and it has a lot of franchisees who pay tax, and it uses up a lot of property, and there's taxes on property and so forth. So overall, although Starbucks as a kind of corporate entity may pay very little tax, that actually it generates activities within the economy that pay a lot of tax. And you could probably say the same for Amazon. To be fair, that all the big logistical operations that they have and so on are all taxable locally. Where it doesn't work is with companies like Google or Meta, where there's no real physical infrastructure in the host, as it were, in the host country, and they are then transferring vast amounts of money to low tax, to tax havens. At zero cost. So whether it's an interest pay, whether they however they dress it up as an interest payment or as a royalty payment or as a dividend, or because of the various tax treaties and so on, none of that is taxed, and that is sold to us as, well, we're a very attractive place to come and do business. Meta want to come here and do business, and Google wants to come here and do business. Well, I'm damn sure they do, since we don't tax them. So why would they? Why would they not? And then you have someone like Donald Trump saying, well, if you do tax them, we'll put up tariffs and so on and so forth. But I kind of think we should call their bluff, really. We should just absolutely call their bluff. And any transfer out of the United Kingdom should you just whack 20% withholding tax on that and let them argue for a rebate. And Trump tried the tariff trick, and it fell flat on its face. The Chinese just killed it dead with by putting a stranglehold on rare earths and other absolutely essential ingredients to a modern industrial enterprise. Americans can't even replace their missiles because they can't get enough rare earths from China. And likelihood is that Trump went to China earlier this year in order to bow down and kiss Xi Jinping's ring finger, beg for rare earths. But even without the rare earths, are you going to double the price of an iPhone? Are you going to double the price of a I'd like to see any American president try that one on. And once China's through the gate, the whole house of cards just collapses, and the whole tariff thing hasn't really gone very far. Hasn't gone very far. So I'm not sure we should really. I'm not sure, as I say, that we shouldn't really just call that bluff. But the real point is, conceptually, we've lost the idea of redistribution, despite the fact that we are the wealthiest economy ever in the history of wealth. And we've allowed our wealth to become hugely concentrated. We've allowed it. We, people who vote for Andy Burnham, we're allowing it. We're allowing him to just not think of it. And having lost the concept of redistribution, we've lost the technical know-how to redistribute.